June 2018, a seemingly ordinary summer day, turned into a horrific tragedy when the twisted secret between stepfather and stepson unraveled, leaving a trail of blood and a shattered family in its wake. Alexander Alex Wyatt, a 45-year-old businessman, was the kind of man who seemed to have everything. With his sharp features, neatly groomed beard, and a perpetual air of confidence, Alex had built a successful career in the tech industry. His life was meticulously curated, much like the modern, sleek house he shared with his wife, Emily. Emily, a 42-year-old corporate lawyer, was equally successful, her sharp mind and relentless drive propelling her to the top of her field. The couple appeared to be the epitome of suburban success, living in a spacious home in an upscale neighborhood, driving luxury cars, and attending high-profile social events. But beneath this picture-perfect exterior, Alex and Emily's marriage was not as solid as it seemed. Over the years, their relationship had grown distant. Emily, consumed by her career, often brought work home, spending long hours in her home office. Alex, feeling neglected, had his own growing frustration. This distance between them created a silent tension in their home, a tension that was only exacerbated by the presence of Jordan, Emily's 23-year-old son from her first marriage. Jordan was a striking young man, with his mother's sharp features and his father's dark hair. But beneath his good looks lay a troubled past. Jordan had recently dropped out of college, unable to find his place in the world. His life seemed to be on hold, drifting between odd jobs and staying out late with friends. Moving back into his mother's home was supposed to be a fresh start, but it quickly became clear that he was struggling to adjust. Alex had always had a complicated relationship with Jordan. On the surface, they were civil, even friendly at times. Alex had tried to be a supportive stepfather, but there was always an underlying tension between them. This tension began to take a darker turn when Alex found himself inexplicably drawn to Jordan in ways he didn't understand, or rather, in ways he refused to acknowledge. It all began one evening after a particularly heated argument between Emily and Jordan about his lack of direction. Emily, frustrated and exhausted, had gone to bed early, leaving Alex and Jordan alone in the living room. Sensing Jordan's agitation, Alex offered him a drink, hoping to smooth things over. Jordan accepted, and they sat together, the tension between them softened by the alcohol. As the night wore on, the conversation turned personal. Jordan opened up about his struggles, his feelings of being lost and unsure of his future. Alex, in turn, shared his own frustrations with his marriage, feeling neglected and unappreciated by Emily. What began as a fatherly gesture of concern soon took on a different tone. Alex found himself noticing the way Jordan's shirt clung to his muscular frame, the way his lips moved as he spoke. Jordan, perhaps sensing the shift, didn't pull away when Alex's hand brushed against his. It was a brief, almost accidental touch, but it lingered just a moment too long. In that moment, something unspoken passed between them, something dangerous. The days that followed were a whirlwind of confusion and desire for Alex. He couldn't stop thinking about Jordan. The way he moved, the way he spoke, the way he looked at him. He tried to push these thoughts aside, telling himself it was just a passing infatuation, something he could control. But the more he tried to suppress it, the stronger the feelings became. Jordan, too, seemed to be affected. He became more withdrawn, his mood shifting between sullen and distant. But there were moments, fleeting glances, the brush of a hand in passing, that suggested he was just as conflicted as Alex. It wasn't long before these stolen moments turned into something more. It started with furtive glances, then stolen kisses when Emily was out of the house. Their first real encounter happened in Alex's car, a black Audi Q7 that he often used for business. They had gone for a drive, ostensibly to talk about Jordan's future, but the conversation quickly turned into something else. Parked in a secluded spot, far from prying eyes, they gave in to the desire that had been simmering between them. It was a moment of intense passion, a forbidden act that felt both thrilling and terrifying. After that night, there was no turning back. Alex and Jordan began a secret affair, meeting whenever they could. They were careful, always ensuring Emily was none the wiser. They would meet in hotel rooms, in the darkened corners of the house when Emily was working late, and sometimes even in Alex's car. The secrecy of their relationship only added to the intensity, making each encounter feel like a dangerous game. But as their affair grew more intense, so did the tension in the household. Jordan, initially conflicted, began to enjoy the power dynamic between him and Alex. The affair gave him a sense of control, a way to rebel against his mother's expectations. Alex, on the other hand, was torn between his guilt and his uncontrollable desire. He knew what they were doing was wrong, but the thrill of the forbidden was too strong to resist. As the weeks went by, their relationship became more than just physical. They began to share secrets, fears, and dreams, forming a twisted bond that went beyond mere lust. Jordan would confide in Alex about his insecurities, his feelings of being lost in life, and Alex would share his frustrations with his marriage, his feelings of inadequacy. These conversations deepened their connection, making their affair more than just a physical relationship. It became an emotional one as well. But as their bond grew stronger, so did the paranoia. Both men became increasingly aware of the risks they were taking, the consequences if Emily were to find out. Jordan, feeling the pressure of their secret, began to act out. He started staying out late, getting into fights, and engaging in reckless behavior. Emily, attributing this to his troubled past, grew more concerned about her son. She noticed the changes in Jordan, his sudden mood swings, his erratic behavior, but she couldn't understand the cause. Alex, too, began to change. He became more possessive of Jordan, jealous whenever he thought Jordan was seeing someone else. This jealousy led to heated confrontations between them, where Alex's darker side began to emerge. He started to manipulate Jordan, using emotional and financial control to keep him in line. What had once been a thrilling affair now turned into a nightmarish power struggle, with Alex exerting dominance over Jordan both emotionally and physically. As the tension in the house reached a boiling point, Emily began to suspect something was wrong. She noticed the strange charges on Alex's credit card, hotel stays, expensive gifts, things she never received. Her suspicions grew, but she was torn between confronting Alex and protecting Jordan, whom she still saw as her troubled, vulnerable son. The pressure became too much for Jordan, who began to withdraw from Alex. This rejection drove Alex to desperate measures. He threatened to reveal their affair to Emily if Jordan tried to end it. Feeling trapped and manipulated, Jordan reluctantly continued the relationship, but the tension was unbearable. Their sexual encounters became darker and more violent, with Alex pushing boundaries to maintain control over Jordan. In a twisted bid to keep Jordan under his control, Alex began to gaslight him, making Jordan believe that Emily was the real threat. He manipulated Jordan into thinking that Emily would disown him if she ever found out about the affair. Alex's manipulations pushed Jordan to the brink of a psychological breakdown, blurring the lines between reality and Alex's carefully constructed lies. The situation reached a critical point when Emily finally uncovered the truth. One day, while Jordan was out, she found his phone left on the kitchen counter, buzzing with messages. Emily, her heart pounding, opened the messages to find a series of explicit texts between Alex and Jordan. She was devastated, her world crumbling as she realized the extent of the betrayal. Emily confronted Jordan that evening, who broke down and confessed everything. Emily was horrified, not only by the affair, but by the extent of Alex's manipulation. She demanded that Jordan cut all ties with Alex and decided she would confront Alex herself. The confrontation between Emily and Alex was explosive. Emily, seething with anger, threatened to expose Alex and ruin his career. Alex, feeling cornered, turned the blame on Jordan, accusing him of seducing him and claiming that it was all Jordan's fault. The argument escalated as Alex became violent, throwing objects around the house in a fit of rage. Jordan, hearing the commotion, rushed to intervene, but the situation spiraled out of control. In the chaos, Alex's anger reached a boiling point. He attacked Jordan, accusing him of betraying their special relationship. Emily tried to protect her son, but Alex's rage was unstoppable. In a moment of pure rage, Alex grabbed a heavy brass candlestick from the fireplace mantel and swung it at Jordan with all his strength. The blow struck Jordan on the side of his head, a sickening thud echoing through the room as he crumpled to the floor. Blood pooled beneath Jordan's head, staining the polished hardwood floor, and Emily screamed, the sound filled with pure horror and despair. As Jordan lay motionless, Emily rushed to his side, her hands trembling as she tried to stop the bleeding, but it was too late. The life had already drained from Jordan's eyes, leaving him a lifeless shell on the floor. Alex, now realizing the gravity of what he had done, stood frozen, the candlestick still clutched in his hand, his mind struggling to process the scene before him. Emily, her hands covered in Jordan's blood, looked up at Alex with a mixture of hatred and fear. She screamed at him, blaming him for everything, for the affair, for the lies, for the murder of her son. Alex, in a twisted state of denial, tried to justify his actions, claiming that he did it out of love, that he was protecting their secret. But his words only fueled Emily's rage. In a desperate attempt to escape the horror, Emily stumbled to her feet and ran for the door. But Alex wasn't done. His mind, now completely unhinged, convinced him that Emily was to blame for everything. He lunged at her, trying to grab her. But Emily fought back with a strength she didn't know she had. She managed to grab a glass vase from a nearby table and smashed it over Alex's head. The vase shattered, sending shards of glass and blood flying, and Alex staggered backward, disoriented and bleeding from the head wound. Taking advantage of Alex's momentary daze, Emily bolted out of the house, her heart racing as she ran down the driveway and into the street. She didn't stop running until she reached a neighbor's house, where she pounded on the door, screaming for help. The neighbors, shocked by her appearance, covered in blood, her clothes torn, immediately called the police. Back at the house, Alex stumbled around, disoriented and bleeding, as the reality of what he had done began to set in. He looked down at Jordan's lifeless body, the once vibrant young man now lying dead on the floor, and he was overcome with a wave of nausea and guilt. Alex sank to his knees, clutching his head in his hands, his mind spiraling out of control as the weight of his actions crushed him. The police arrived within minutes, their sirens cutting through the quiet of the suburban neighborhood. Emily stood outside, her body shaking uncontrollably as she tried to explain to the officers what had happened. She could barely get the words out, her voice choked with tears and fear. The officers, seeing the blood on her clothes and the wild look in her eyes, quickly realized that something horrific had taken place. The officers entered the house, guns drawn, ready for anything. The scene that greeted them was one of pure chaos. The living room was in disarray, furniture overturned, broken glass scattered across the floor, and in the middle of it all, Jordan's lifeless body lying in a pool of blood. Alex was sitting on the floor, his head bleeding profusely, the candlestick lying next to him, stained with Jordan's blood. The officers quickly subdued Alex, who didn't resist as they handcuffed him and led him out of the house. He was in a daze, his mind broken by the weight of his guilt and the realization of what he had done. As they led him past Emily, who was now surrounded by paramedics, Alex muttered something incoherent, his eyes glazed over with a mix of fear and regret. Emily, still in shock, was taken to the hospital for treatment. The paramedics tried to comfort her, but there was little they could do to ease the pain of losing her son in such a brutal way. Her mind kept replaying the moment Jordan fell to the floor, the sound of the candlestick hitting his head echoing in her ears like a haunting refrain. Meanwhile, Detective Nolan Reese, a seasoned investigator with over 20 years on the force, was called to the scene. Detective Reese was known for his sharp mind and his ability to piece together even the most complex cases, and as soon as he arrived at the scene, he knew this was no ordinary domestic dispute. Detective Reese surveyed the crime scene with a practiced eye, noting the blood spatter, the overturned furniture, and the broken glass. The scene told a story of a violent struggle, but the details were still unclear. He immediately began interviewing Emily, who was barely coherent, her words coming out in broken sentences as she tried to explain what had happened. Detective Reese took detailed notes, his mind already working to piece together the events that had led to this tragedy. As the investigation unfolded, more details about the affair and Alex's manipulative behavior came to light. Detective Reese discovered the explicit text messages between Alex and Jordan, painting a picture of a deeply twisted relationship. The affair became public knowledge, turning the case into a media sensation. News outlets picked up the story, painting Alex as a predator who had taken advantage of his stepson, manipulating him into a toxic and dangerous relationship. Alex, now in police custody, was charged with murder. He maintained that Jordan's death was an accident, that he hadn't meant to kill him, but the evidence suggested otherwise. Detective Reese and his team uncovered more details about Alex's manipulative and abusive behavior, casting doubt on his claims of innocence. The case was quickly building against him, with the prosecution painting Alex as a cold-blooded killer who had exploited his stepson's vulnerabilities for his own twisted desires. Emily, now left to deal with the aftermath of the tragedy, was racked with guilt. She blamed herself for not seeing the signs earlier, for not protecting her son from Alex's influence. The media's portrayal of the family scandal only added to her torment as she struggled to cope with the loss of Jordan and the betrayal of Alex. She couldn't escape the feeling that she had failed as a mother, that she should have done more to save Jordan from the horrors that had unfolded in their home. As the case went to trial, the courtroom became a battleground of conflicting narratives. The prosecution painted Alex as a manipulative predator who had exploited Jordan's vulnerabilities, using his position as a father figure to control and dominate him. They presented the evidence of the affair, the explicit text messages, and the details of Alex's abusive behavior, all pointing to a man who had carefully orchestrated a deadly power dynamic. The defense, on the other hand, tried to shift the blame onto Jordan, suggesting that he was the one who had pursued Alex, that the death was a tragic accident resulting from a heated argument that had spiraled out of control. They painted Jordan as a troubled young man who had seduced his stepfather, leading him down a path of destruction. The trial was a grueling process, with Emily forced to relive the horrors of that night as she testified against Alex. She described the moment she found the text messages, the confrontation that followed, and the moment Alex struck Jordan down with the candlestick. Her testimony was heartbreaking, filled with tears and pain, but it was also damning evidence against Alex. The jury was left to deliberate the complex case, weighing the evidence and the testimonies. After weeks of intense courtroom drama, they finally reached a verdict. Alex was found guilty of second-degree murder, a verdict that acknowledged his role in Jordan's death, while also recognizing the extenuating circumstances that led to the fatal confrontation. The judge sentenced Alex to 25 years in prison, with no possibility of parole. The sentence was met with mixed reactions. Some saw it as justice for Jordan's death, while others believed it didn't fully account for the tragedy that had torn the Wyatt family apart. Emily, now alone, was left to rebuild her life from the ashes of the tragedy. She decided to move away from the town that had become synonymous with her family's downfall, seeking a fresh start in a place where she wasn't constantly reminded of the horrors that had unfolded in her home. But the memories of that night and the loss of Jordan haunted her, leaving her forever changed.